patrons and subscribers, and all you folks who just wandered in. My name's Random Rob. Welcome to the new show. I got some shirts from QWERTY in the mail today, including this nice Cowboy Bebop graphic. I've been wanting this one for a while. Today on the new show, we're going back to 1975 again. This time to look at L.Q. Jones' sci-fi exploitation cult classic, A Boy and His Dog, based on the Nebula Award-winning novella by Harlan Ellison. And I'm going to tell you 5 things about this darkly comic post-apocalyptic film. Jones was a native Texan. In his career, he'd been a farmer, a rancher. He'd worked in Texas and in Nicaragua. And through some connections he had when he was in college, he ended up getting into Western movies and would become a regular of Sam Peckinpah's. In the 60s and 70s, he started directing and producing his own films. They were B-movies, exploitation pictures, usually thrillers or horror films. And when one of his friends brought him a copy of A Boy and His Dog and he read it, he realized it was a film he had to make. Despite the fact that he knew that Ellison was a fairly unapproachable author and that he did not have a reputation as a serious filmmaker. Ellison believed in him and began writing a screenplay, but was only able to write 13 pages before he realized he was in the midst of one of the worst cases of writer's block he'd ever had. After 20 years of continuous story writing and coming out of a particularly difficult divorce, Ellison found he was tapped out. He couldn't write. Jones took it upon himself to finish the screenplay, which took him the better part of a year. So, did he succeed? Let's find out. Here are my 5 things. Number 1, the novella versus the film. The novella A Boy and His Dog is about Vic, a 15-year-old drifter in a post-apocalyptic United States after a nuclear war, whose only companion is a telepathic dog named Blood. And they have a symbiotic relationship in that Blood is able to sniff out females for Vic to track down and rape, and Vic keeps Blood fed, as Blood is no longer able to hunt because of the process that has made him telepathic. There are 2 sequences in the novella that take up most of the story. One in which Vic and Blood locate Quilla June in an abandoned gymnasium, Quilla June being a member of one of the Down Under communities. The Down Under people have rejected living on the surface and are attempting to live their lives in a freeze frame of early 1900s Americana. Vic finds himself entranced by Quilla June and is unable to rape her, and ends up talking with her, and awkwardly trying to form a relationship with her, which he knows nothing about. The gymnasium is then besieged by a rover gang. Ultimately, they manage to set fire to the building and convince the rover pack that they are dead. Quilla June knocks Vic out and escapes back to the underground, knowing that Vic will follow. The second sequence involves Vic arriving in the underground of Topeka and becoming a member of the community, where he finds out that the local elders want to use him as a stud to impregnate their young women. 1, because Topeka does not have a high fertility rate, and 2, the women produce mostly female children. And they're hoping that Vic's DNA will break this cycle. Now, I can see why it took L.Q. Jones a year to write a screenplay out of this novella, in that he had a story to work with that was essentially one long, drawn-out gunfight followed by a long, drawn-out sequence where Vic wanders around riffing in an interior monologue about how much he can't stand the people in Topeka. So Jones managed to do something almost unheard of. He added scenes and expanded the scope of the novella with next to no budget. Now, Ellison was so depressed about not being able to write the script himself, he refused to look at Jones' script. He refused to go to screenings. Finally, Jones convinced him to watch the rough cut of the film. When it was done, Ellison got out of his chair, ran over to Jones. Jones thought he was going to hit him or start yelling, and instead Ellison said, "That's my story. You got it." But there were some problems. Number 2, unpacking the misogyny. Harlan Ellison's conception for A Boy and His Dog came down to the idea that in a post-war environment, the 3 things that become the most important commodities are food, weapons, and women. A nuclear war has taken place, society is in collapse. Vic is supposed to be 15, a horny teenager who knows nothing about women except tracking them down and raping them, or avoiding the ones who have become skilled killers in the aftermath. It's dark, ugly material, it's meant to be, and it makes a certain bleak kind of sense given Vic's age and lack of culture. In the movie, Vic is played by Don Johnson, who is in his mid-20s. So these unevolved aspects of character that make sense in a story about an uncultured teenager make less sense being played by an older male who we would expect to be a little more evolved. A Clockwork Orange, the film, suffers the same sort of representational problem with the age of Alex being older in the film than he is in the story. But beyond the representational issue, L.Q. Jones, in writing the screenplay, had peppered more misogynistic terminology into the script, which pissed off Harlan Ellison. He especially didn't like the fact that Jones had Blood using derogatory language about women. Ellison felt it was inappropriate and out of character for Blood, who's the most stable and smart person in the story. So Ellison, in his typical fashion, gave L.Q. Jones bloody hell. He said, you have to change this. You have to change it. Jones at the time was broke and could not afford to take the film back to be redubbed. So Ellison asked him if they had any unused footage from the film laying around. He took all of the unused film to a science fiction convention and sold individual frames to fans for $1 to $5 a piece, and took a bag full of money back to L.Q. Jones and said, "Is this enough?" Although he did leave the last line of the movie, where Blood makes a joke about having eaten Quilla June, who Vic kills and feeds to Blood to save his life. He had a beef with Jones for years about leaving the line in. He always hated it. Nonetheless, it's ironic to note that it is the line that people always remember from the film. It arguably provides an appropriately sarcastic punchline to what is a very dark story. If you are interested in hearing more about the story of the redubbing of the film and the argument over that line, the Shout Factory Blu-ray has a wonderful conversation between L.Q. Jones and Ellison. They hadn't seen or spoken to each other in years, and it's just a wonderful bit of conversation between the writer and the director. And it's required viewing if you're a fan of this movie. It's worth noting that Ellison was an author who never returned to previous stories he had written. But in the case of A Boy and His Dog, he wrote a teleplay for a sequel, as well as some spin-off stories. The sequel was going to be called A Girl and His Dog, and would follow Blood after Vic's death, taking up with a female rover named Spike. This was a sequel that was in talks for years, but never quite came together because of funding, and seemed to have been scrapped officially in 2003 when Tiger, the sheepdog who played Blood in the original film, passed away. Number 3, Best Dog Ever. Now, there are a lot of movies where animals give performances and are voiced by humans, but to me, A Boy and His Dog is the one where the illusion is completely believable from start to finish. in part because of the amazing performance by the dog Tiger, and due to the pitch-perfect performance of character actor and singer Tim McIntyre as the voice of Blood. Without Tiger and McIntyre, this is a film that simply wouldn't work. There's not enough reason to like Vic. He's a blunt, stupid character, and a hard one for the audience to root for. Ellison said part of what he was trying to convey was his own split between his stupid and more evolved self, as well as paying homage to his dog, Abu, Ellison's companion for 11 years. If you pick up a copy of A Boy and His Dog on Kindle, they now include a short article that Ellison wrote about the death of Abu. And it's a good footnote for understanding why he wrote the story the way he did. Ellison said he knew that Abu was a better judge of character than he was. Number 4, Michael, the first Terminator. One of the obvious changes from the novella to the film, again since there was no budget, was that the underground of Topeka had security robots, which obviously they could not afford to do. So in the film, the Topeka Committee has an enforcer named Michael, who we find out by the end is actually a robot. Michael was played by Hal Baylor, who is mostly known for his appearance in A Boy and His Dog, and he was also a regular on the TV show Emergency. Baylor had been a Marine Corps veteran and a boxer, and his intimidating physicality definitely lends itself to the creepy, smiling character of Michael, especially at the end of the film when he begins dispatching Quilla June's conspirator friends. It's one of the first iconic film images I can remember of an unstoppable killer robot who looked human. So A Boy and His Dog does have a little connection to films like The Terminator. The Terminator itself drew much inspiration from the second season Outer Limits episode Soldier that was penned by Harlan Ellison. And one detail in that story we can see the evolution of in A Boy and His Dog is that in Soldier, the future GI Corlo, who ends up in the past, tries to talk to a house cat and explains to the language professor he's living with that in the future cats are used on the battlefield to do delicate recon and give orders to the troops. And number 5, Topeka as a modern metaphor. Now, the idea of survivors after a nuclear war living in bunkers long after the war has ended has been a popular trope in science fiction for a while now. The Fallout series of video games, for example, have used this idea for years. What's interesting to me watching A Boy and His Dog now is the idea of societal regression that Topeka presents. Not just that the people who live underground are cut off and weird, but that they are specifically trying to live in an old, idealized version of America. And particularly that Topeka has a certain southern antebellum South vibe to it. That those feelings and attitudes and nostalgia for that period are underground. May not have been an obvious metaphor when the movie was made in 1975, but feels very relevant today. So, do I think A Boy and His Dog holds up? I would say mostly, with a couple of caveats that it's important to understand the misogyny in the original story in terms of the age of the character, that translates a little awkwardly to film, and understanding that it was something that Harlan Ellison fought to have toned down. With those things in mind, I think it's an amazing low-budget science fiction picture, the first real post-apocalyptic wasteland picture, and in my opinion, still the best talking dog picture ever done. So what are some of your favorite post-apocalyptic films? What did you think of A Boy and His Dog? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked what you heard, please press the like button and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron of the new show. I could use your help. Okay friends, this is Random Rob, signing off. I'll see you next time on the new show. Stay safe and be excellent.
The new show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Tony, Marnell, Skipnick, Christopher, Marian, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.